Snoop Dogg really fooled all of us by saying he was going smokeless, huh? I mean, it had to have been for a bit, right? It's like too much of an image thing. I don't know. Snoop Dogg is like a big meme or whatever. I guess over time I've come to despise. I I dislike weed a lot, man. People cope so hard about whether or not you can get addicted to weed. It's like having a celebrity whose entire bit is that they're drunk all the time. I don't know. It feels like nobody, like it doesn't get taken very seriously. Yeah. Who cares? I mean, I feel like if there was a celebrity whose bit was that they were always incredibly drunk and everyone just celebrated that, it might lead to some negative outcomes in real world. But you can get addicted to anything. Do you see? This is exactly what I mean. You point out people can get addicted to weed, and people's like, "Oh, bro, yeah, like you can get addicted to like jelly beans. Like, like there's no difference at all between a drug that chemically affects your mind and the jelly beans. You know, I mean, I know. Um, yeah, people really learned that whole chemical versus behavioral addiction thing, and went like, ah, okay, weed can't kill you. Yeah, I know. As far as I've read, you can get a physical dependence to weed, but the whole psychoactive bit isn't well studied. Look, it's not like a hard sell or whatever. Like basically everyone in chat right now who's above the age of 15 knows somebody who's addicted to weed. It's not exactly rare, you know. It's probably more common, at least in younger people, than alcohol addicts. But yeah, the difference being that it just gets treated differently, you know. I don't know a single stoner, let alone an addict. Well, that's dope. Hell yeah. People in here hear you badmouth weed. They think you're putting it in the same tier as fentanyl. That's because weed smokers are literally the most defensive people in the world, dude. Holy shit. Like, you saw in chat the moment I said that. Like, hey, I don't think a guy whose bit is that he's always on a drug is the best bit. And people in chat are like, did you know that weed is actually as addictive as paper clips? How about people who have a addiction to paper clips, psychological addiction to paper clips? They really like paper clips. What about those? That happens, you know? It's like, do you think it's some kind of reaction to with the rhetoric around weed that's been prevalent during the war on drugs? I mean, to an extent. I don't know. Vaush, I just don't like how you start acting like Destiny whenever you talk about weed. Well, I get shorter? What do you mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. I just I there's no point in demonizing something relatively harmless like weed. You are an addict, bro. At no point have I demonized it. What, like, anyone defensive enough to read into what I have said, demonizing it, like you are an addict. You're defensive enough. You're an addict. You know, like you need to check your shit. Okay, like people again. It's weird. You know, it's not like I'm anti ever using drugs or anything. I just think that people are overly permissive when it comes to weed addicts because they pretend that you can't get addicted to weed because they'll say shit like, well, you can't overdose. I'm not talking about overdosing. I'm just talking about like living your life with a dependency on being high on weed, you know, of which there are plenty of people who do. It's not exactly rare. Do you think someone who smokes weed every single day is inherently an addict? Kind of, yeah. Like every day? Yeah. I guess it depends. Maybe it like depends. Like if you use like I don't know some kind of THC for pain management, or you like fall asleep. Maybe not. Maybe then it's like kind of melatonin, but a little stronger. I don't really know. But if you're like, ah man, this would be more fun if I was high, or like, oh, it's weed o'clock, 420 or whatever, then yeah, probably. Like if a person every day was like, yeah, okay, time for me to take like 2 or 3 shots or whatever. I think people do drink a lot, but I think that because smoking weed, you're smoking, whereas with alcohol, you're drinking. You can have a little bit of red wine with it having no effect alcohol wise on your brain. So maybe you just like having some red wine with your dinner. I don't necessarily think that makes you an alcoholic, but if you're drinking enough every day that it like makes you tipsy or whatever, and that's like an everyday thing, then yeah, probably. I don't think chat's engaging with the subject. Vaush, new shoe on head video drop with the title, Are Women Okay? We place bets how long it takes for someone to blame you for this. Well, women aren't okay, so if the answer to the question is no, then I probably agree with the video. Pretty sure medically drinking wine every night is considered alcoholism. Yeah, maybe it is. I don't know that much. I just think that I just know there are a lot of people who are like, man, you know, life is just a lot more fun when you're high. And I think that's kind of sad personally. I know a guy who used to be high all the time, literally all day. He'd smoke constantly, only stopped for a few months because he had to get a new job. He was absolutely an addict. Yeah, I'd certainly say so. People use the behavioral dependence thing to downplay the addictiveness of things like weed, but the chemical basis for behavioral addiction still literally affects gene expression and neuron function. Yeah, I think people downplay it quite a lot. So, yeah, I don't really know. Nice, Mad Hatter. Probably not Diogenes Camus. But is it any difference to caffeine, folk? Genuinely asking. I mean, you can have a caffeine addiction, certainly. I think the main thing that makes me feel like the caffeine addiction, even if a person does have an addiction to caffeine, is more defensible, is because caffeine doesn't really alter your brain state in the same way that alcohol or weed or any of those other drugs do. I guess maybe in some cases with some people it could, but for the most part, caffeine just gives you some energy, which means that if you're an addict to it, the thing that you're sort of conditioning yourself to set up permanently is like more energy. Whereas being high or being drunk are like complete chemical brain state changes, which I feel is pretty different in terms of like the potential for being abused for the purpose of escapism. You know? Yeah, cripple, exactly. In all honesty, Vosh, people are defensive about this because of the constant demonizing and dehumanizing that happened during the war on drugs. I think that's bullshit. A lot of the people in chat who are getting defensive right now are my age or younger. You have grown up in an environment where weed has become increasingly legal in the United States. It's barely even stigmatized these days. I think people are defensive because they don't like the idea that they might have like a negative relationship with weed. And the problem with this conversation is that every single time I say anything, people hear a different thing. Listen to this. Someone I knew drank so much caffeine he thought he was having a heart attack. It definitely can be unhealthy. Didn't say it couldn't be. That's not true. Coffee is a stimulant and it totally affects you. I didn't say it doesn't affect you. I specifically said it gives you more energy. Like, I said that. Not true, Vaush. Caffeine does alter your brain state. Yes, it gives you more energy. That energy is in your brain. It's brain energy. Brenergy. That's not true. Coffee is a drink. True. Would you say you were addicted to Adderall or lithium? No. I don't think lithium can form any kind of addiction. It's literally, that'd be like getting addicted to having a Band-Aid on your arm. It's just a thing that helps a thing. It's not like there's not like quit trying to draw like, tenuous connections to defend weed, like conceptual. Why is it so hard for people to understand that if you smoke weed all the time, then there might be an issue? Like, why is that so complicated? Like, seriously, why do we do critical thinking on this channel all the time and then suddenly everyone locks up on that specific subject? You know, you're not really doing much critical thinking if your critical thinking ability is shut off the moment you're talking about something that relates to you. Have you guys ever wondered why you're all so cerebral and big brain when you're thinking about politics in the abstract, but then when it comes to managing your own personal relationships or finances or life, you're all tards? Maybe it's because you're only capable of being cerebral on subjects that don't personally affect you. But the moment your emotions come into play and you're engaging with something that actually relates to your life and your biases, all of a sudden you turn into just a regular drooling low IQ normie. Maybe the real test of being a high IQ gigabrain Chad Lord, like myself, I say, with his voice dripping with sarcasm, is to be able to apply that engagement and thought process to stuff that personally affects you. You know, I couldn't even say that without laughing. I'm sorry. So is Adderall addictive or not? Yeah, it totally can be. I take very little Adderall though, so it doesn't. I don't think it's Best test for what you're talking about is meat eaters who can admit eating meat is objectively bad. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Yeah, like the people who will say it's bad to torture a dog to death, but will say that like eating meat is ethically acceptable are like ethically retarded, like ethically brain dead. Basically, they have no. It's not that everyone has to be perfectly consistent all the time because nobody is or can be. No human ever has been. It's a matter of being able to understand like the powers at play, basically, like what's involved. We do lots of stuff day by day that hurts people, hurts things. Do you think it's okay to like torture insects? Well, you step on the grass and kill 1,000 bugs every time you do, like stuff like that. You know, is the answer to never step on the grass? Well, no, that's not really like a sensible way to live your life, I don't think. But you have to at least be able to think about it. You know, maybe there's something else at play. Maybe it's more about like your engagement with these systems. But a lot of people seem to think that like not thinking about it absolves them of the entire math equation, I feel. By that argument slash example, why haven't you thrown your cats against the wall or kicked them recently? See, this is what I mean by like ethical retardation. Your argument by implication is saying that because a person eats meat, that means that they are okay with the torturing of animals. The proper answer is you're not okay with the torturing of animals and you don't think the meat industry is good. Then, having acknowledged that you think the meat industry isn't good, you then continue to eat meat. It's better to acknowledge the hypocrisy in your behavior, which is again something everyone does, than to pretend it's not a hypocrisy. People are so desperate to pretend to be intellectually consistent that they will twist themselves into pretzel knots, pretending to believe things they don't actually believe, so they can construct some kind of delusional reality where they're like fully consistent in all their behaviors. Lunatics, absolute lunatics. Nobody lives like this in reality. It's delusional. It's completely delusional. In reality, you do the best you can. Utilitarianism doesn't lean much into the uh, um, it's obligatory versus supererogatory. I think the term is. I could be forgetting that properly. What is good to do versus what you must do. What is bad to not do, I should say. There isn't really an ethical answer to this. I guess maybe if you're like a deontologist, but they're retards, so who cares? Also, they don't really have a real answer to it either. There is no real answer. It's ethics. There's no real answer. There are arguments and there are counter arguments. But it does bother me when people can't like engage with the arguments, if that makes sense. There's not really an ethical way to argue, like, yeah, you shouldn't torture animals, but also the meat industry is completely okay, unless you have some insane. That you would have to have some ethical system that doesn't really like make sense to think about. To be honest, it would be some very out there weird shit. You would have to specifically hate cows. Yeah, I think that it impedes people's ability to like think about this stuff, I guess. What are other philosophies besides utilitarianism? Utilitarianism isn't a philosophy; it's an ethical framework. But there's like virtue ethics and deontology. The truth to this is that I used to spend a lot more time thinking about this stuff than I do now. The problem is that most of the political battles that we're facing today, like most of the big questions that we're trying to battle over in our political system, aren't really complicated enough that you even need to defer that often to like a broader ethical system. You know how many times I've even gotten to the like framework level when talking to a conservative and anything has come of that? They don't know what they have no idea. Like you know what I mean? It would be like getting a PhD in physics so that you could explain to a child why it's bad to throw bricks at kids in the schoolyard because the physics helps you understand how the brick moves. And they're like, "Why is it bad?" And you're like, "Well, the transfer of kinetic energy from the brick to their body leads to a shock wave across their skin, their subdermal tissue, and then their bone." And it's like there's like no point. It's still good to know. I mean, knowing physics can be really cool and useful. But in terms of like debating people online, God, how often do you go back to the fundamentals? It's like most of the time the milieu of, is that the right word? Milieu? Is that the correct word? A person's social environment. No, that's not. I was going to say the milieu of retards. Well, my social environment is that, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry. I'm so sleep deprived. I shouldn't even be talking about this. What is this segment? This is not a segment. Consider a perfectly spherical Nazi. True. Has Vaush talked about the Argentina Trump? No. We were about to do 5 more hours on that particular subject. No. Moving on. Get me out of here, please. Please, please. Is there a difference between ethics and morals? Yeah, the difference between them is that if anyone ever tries to explain the difference between ethics and morals, you give them a wedgie. Basically. You give them you reach into their pants and you grab their tidy whities and you pull up until you can put it over their head like a hat. Wait, now I'm curious. About what? I just gave you the answer.